Let me paint a picture for you. You're working hard, earning a decent salary, and living what feels like a comfortable life. But when you think about retirement, there's this nagging question. Will I have enough? If this sounds familiar, you're not alone.
Wow, I feel like you're speaking directly to me. It's such a relatable scenario. So many people worry about this, but no one really talks about why middle-income families are getting squeezed the hardest.
Exactly. Today, we're diving into the untold story of how middle-income families are stuck in a retirement no man's land. Too rich for assistance, but too strapped to save. Trust me, by the end of this video, you'll see retirement planning in a whole new light. But first, hit that like button, subscribe, and ring the bell. You don't want to miss the rest of this conversation. It might just change your future.
All right, let's dive in. I'm already hooked.
Let's start with some cold, hard facts. The middle class, the backbone of America, is shrinking. In 1970, 62% of Americans were considered middle class. Today, that number has dropped to about 50%. And for retirement, this is a huge problem.
Wow, so half the population has fallen out of the middle class? That's insane. But how does that connect to retirement?
Great question. Middle-income earners are in this weird position. They don't qualify for much government aid, but they also don't have the disposable income to invest like the wealthy do. Here's a sobering stat. 64% of middle-income households are at risk of running out of money in retirement.
That's heartbreaking. And I'm guessing it's because so much of their income goes to just getting by, right?
Exactly. Middle-income earners spend 50% to 60% of their salary on essentials, housing, healthcare, and education. There's just not much left for long-term savings.
All right, let's talk about the elephant in the room. Savings. How much are people actually setting aside for retirement?
Not nearly enough. The average middle-class household has around $44,000 saved for retirement by age 50. But here's the kicker. To maintain their lifestyle in retirement, they'll need at least $1.7 million. That's a savings gap of over $1.65 million.
$44,000 versus $1.7 million? Oh my gosh, that's not just a gap. That's a canyon.
Exactly. And it gets worse. For those nearing retirement, the average 401k balance is just $147,000. That's barely enough to last 5 years, let alone 20 or 30.
So what happens? Do they just keep working forever?
That's the reality for a lot of people. But others are forced to cut back drastically, downsizing their homes, skipping vacations, and even delaying necessary medical care. It's not the golden years most people dream about.
Okay, but what about the classic advice we've all heard? Max out your 401k, pay off your debt, and build an emergency fund. Isn't that supposed to work?
It should, in theory. But the reality is that rising costs and stagnant wages have made those strategies much harder to execute. Let me give you an example. Between 2000 and 2023, healthcare premiums increased by 284%. But median household income, it only grew by 68% in the same period.
284% versus 68%? That's devastating. It's no wonder people feel like they're falling behind.
And it's not just healthcare. Housing costs have gone up by over 160% in the last 2 decades. Home ownership, which used to be a cornerstone of retirement security, is now out of reach for many middle-income families. Now, let's talk about something most people don't even think about: taxes. Did you know that Social Security, pension payments, and 401k withdrawals are all taxable during retirement?
Wait, seriously? So even when you're retired, Uncle Sam still takes a cut?
Exactly. And here's how it adds up. For a retiree earning $50,000 a year from these sources, taxes can eat up to 20% of that income. That leaves just $40,000. Factor in healthcare costs, housing, and inflation, and it's barely enough to get by.
That's brutal. It's like you finally think you've made it, and then, bam, more bills to pay.
It's why planning for taxes is just as important as saving for retirement itself. Let's tackle something that quietly erodes your savings year after year: inflation. Most people think of it as just the rising cost of milk or gas, but it has a massive impact on your retirement funds. At an average inflation rate of 3%, the purchasing power of $1 million today will shrink to about $550,000 in 25 years. That's almost half.
Wow, that's like saving up for years and realizing your nest egg isn't nearly as big as you thought. How are people supposed to plan for that?
That's the tricky part. Most traditional retirement calculators don't even account for inflation accurately. This means you might be saving way less than you actually need. And with healthcare costs inflating at an even higher rate, about 5% annually, it's a double whammy for retirees.
So how do we keep our futures safe? You have me and everyone else worried.
One solution that's gaining traction is side hustles. In fact, 45% of Americans now have some form of a side gig to supplement their income.
That makes sense. But how does that help with retirement?
Because side hustles can provide extra income that you can funnel directly into savings or investments. For example, earning an extra $500 a month and investing it with a 7% annual return could grow to nearly $120,000 in 10 years. That's a game changer for middle-income families.
That's amazing. And there are so many options now. Freelancing, selling online, teaching skills, or even driving for rideshare services. It's never been easier to start.
Finally, let's talk about how all of this affects the next generation. Millennials and Gen Z are already feeling the squeeze, with over 60% saying they can't afford to save for retirement because of student loans, housing costs, and stagnant wages.
That's heartbreaking. They're not just delaying retirement savings. They're delaying everything: buying homes, starting families, even taking vacations.
And that's a ripple effect. When younger generations can't save, the burden of caregiving and financial support often falls on their shoulders. It's a vicious cycle that's hard to break without major systemic changes. Make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel.
If you found this content helpful, consider supporting us by becoming a channel member or sending a super thanks.
Every bit helps us bring you more valuable insights. Stay tuned for our next video. Your future self will thank you.